This is Steve Zeltzer with Pacifica and WorkWeek, and this coming week is the anniversary of Juneteenth, which is a commemoration of the notification to Blacks in Texas that they were freed. It was kept from them, this information that slavery had ended was kept from them. And the ILWU Local 10 is going to be having an event at their hall in commemoration of Juneteenth. And joining us is Clarence Thomas, the former Secretary Treasurer of ILWU Local 10. Welcome to our show, Clarence.
Oh, thank you for having me, Steve. It's great to be with you again.
So, Clarence, why don't we talk about Juneteenth as an important commemoration of the struggle of Black people for freedom, the fact that even the information about the emancipation was kept from Blacks in Texas, that they kept it from them, so they continue to use them as slaves.
Yeah, well, just as a personal note, my mother, the first time I ever heard the term Juneteenth was from my mother when I was growing up. And that is because she was born in Port Arthur, Texas. And whenever there was a 4th of July celebration, she always reminded us, me and my siblings, that Black people didn't celebrate the 4th of July, that they celebrated Juneteenth. And that was my first introduction to understanding the concept. But for those in the listening audience who don't have any idea, as you mentioned, Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, the date of the last enslaved Black people in the United States, which was Texas, that were formally informed and emancipated. It was also a reminder that the job of ending all form of slavery is not yet finished. And so Karl Marx once wrote, "We have nothing to lose but our chains and a world to win." The U.S., like all of the Americas, was built on the backs of enslaved labor. And on Juneteenth, we celebrate the emancipation of the last of the enslaved Black people in the United States, as well as a reminder in our commitment to fight against the legacy of slavery. In other words, we must fight against the longstanding impact of systemic racism, white supremacy, racialized capitalism, and all forms of discrimination, which is used to keep the working class divided. As we're talking about Marx, I think it's important to bring him up because of the fact that he understood the dynamics of race and class. And I think that it's important for people to understand, especially, workers, both Black and white workers, why should labor be celebrating this? And so Marx wrote extensively about the Civil War and slavery in the United States, and he made it abundantly clear that enslaved Black people in North America had to be free before wage slaves of the working class could be free of exploitation. He, when we talk about the term wage slave, what he's referring to is the fact that working people have to sell their labor in 8, 10, 12, 16 orders a day in order to survive. And I tell people, longshore workers and other workers, we can be described as that. The only exception that I would make with regards to longshore workers is that we make living wages overall. Not to say that we are getting the wages that we deserve, but most certainly when you compare the wages that we make to other workers who don't receive living wages, and it's important to mention in this country that you have very few households, man, that have $200,000 a year. Very few, probably 18% or less. And I could be overstating that. It could be 10%. And if you live in San Francisco, Steve, you know what the cost of rents and the cost of living in San Francisco is. It's exorbitant. So when we talk about a wage slave, we're basically talking about how the workers have to sell their labor to the bosses. And so there's a connection between a wage slave and African Americans who were um, uh, uh, in bondage, chattel slavery. And so that was a threat to the entire working class. And we can see with the end of the Civil War, this freed up labor to begin to organize, because we have to realize that somewhat 21 years after the Emancipation Proclamation is when we see the Haymarket and the emergence of the working class to organize unions all across the country. So the Civil War was part of the class struggle, because on the one hand, you had enslaved Africans working without pay, and so they're competing. So the workers in the North are competing against workers who don't even make a living. You understand? So that put tremendous pressure. So the country, capitalism could not survive in the United States with that kind of contradiction. It could not survive. And that is the reason why there was a civil war. And I think that one of the things that's important for your listening audience to realize is that African Americans played a very important role in fighting for their freedom. We don't hear enough about that. And what I'm speaking about specifically, Steve, is the fact that there were some 250 slave uprisings that had occurred before the Civil War. And we can talk about the specifics of that. There was a man by the name in 1800, an enslaved man by the name of Gabriel Prosser. He planned a large slave rebellion in the area of Richmond, Virginia, but the news got out before they were able to carry out their plan, and he and 25 of his followers were hanged. Prosser had learned to read, and the Virginia legislature henceforth prohibited the educating of slaves who might, like Gabriel Prosser, be inclined to use their skills for similar purposes. Another enslaved man in Charleston, South Carolina, by the name of Denmark Vesey, was executed in 1822, planning a slave revolt in that city. In 1831, a rebellion led by a fugitive slave by the name of Nat Turner, in Southampton, Virginia, killed more than 50 white people, and that was put down after a few days. Turner went into hiding, but was discovered some 2 months later. Some 21 of the rebels who were with his group were hanged, and another 16 were sold away from the region. So such slave insurrections were prelude to the Civil War. And in fact, it was stated that 179,000 Black men had served as soldiers in the U.S. Army, accounting for about 10% of the total forces. Another 19,000 served in the Navy. So it's important for people to understand this and to realize the importance of enslaved Africans' contributions in winning their freedom. The Civil War took 40,000 of their lives. 3/4 of them died not in combat, but from infections and diseases. These combatants served bravely and were clearly a vital component of the Union's effort to win the war. So this is just some of the information that I think is important for people to understand. The ILWU's contribution in terms of commemorating Juneteenth, it was in 2020, we had some 20,000 people that had come out to the Port of Oakland to hear people like Angela Davis, Danny Glover, Boots Riley, and rank and filers, and many, many others, community leaders and activists. And so that was organized in response to the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all of the various murders that were taking place. by police departments all across the country. But it was also an opportunity to highlight some of these specific struggles that were going on in the Bay Area that had national ramifications. And I'm speaking specifically about the attempt to privatize the third busiest port on the West Coast, the Port of Oakland, by a man by the name of John Fisher, who owns the Oakland A's. And so and I think it was important to highlight that particular struggle, because when we talk about Juneteenth, we need to be able to connect the dots to today to make it relevant, because it's the same struggle that's going on. It's the ruling class against the working class. And at this particular time in American history, where there is so much being done to erase the true history of the United States of America, to create division, to turn the working class against itself, specifically around the issue of race, gender. It's important that programs like this can be made available to set the record straight and to raise the social consciousness of the working class. But one of the things that Local 10 was able to do was initiate a movement where the entire ILWU Longshore Division made a decision not to work on Juneteenth in 2020. And that meant that all 29 ports on the West Coast were shut down, including Vancouver, Canada. And so that was the precursor for the feds to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And I think that just goes to show you the power of the working class. Anytime that workers, specifically longshore workers, who have such an impact at the point of production, when they withhold their labor for 8 hours, that impacts trucking schedules, train schedules. The employer has to rearrange all of their, because of what they call just-in-time delivery, and it disrupts things. So the fact that the employer agrees with the union for these shutdowns, because if they didn't do it, that means that their schedules are all screwed up. So they have to go out and tell their customers, hey, we're not going to be moving any cargo for 8 hours today because of Juneteenth. So I know that this year specifically, Local 10, the largest local in Northern California, we are involved with moving cargo at 5 area ports. I know that in Seattle, Tacoma, they will not be moving any cargo for 8 hours in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know what's going to happen in Los Angeles. I'm not certain about that, but I do know in San Francisco and in the Pacific Northwest, there will not be any cargo moved. I think it's important for me to let the public know that June 19th at 400 North Point Street in San Francisco, there's going to be a Juneteenth Jamboree at ILWU Local 10. So we're asking people to come out. We're having, as I mentioned before, a stop work action to commemorate Juneteenth. Special guests will be Danny Glover, who will be made an honorary member of ILWU Local 10. We are anticipating Sister Angela Davis will either be there or send a video message on that day. And there'll be other speakers who will be there. I'm sure you will be there, Steve, covering this historical event. So that's going to take place Monday. It will start at 1 p.m. There will be food, music, and there will also be great speakers. And this will be a wonderful working class gathering in San Francisco at Local 10. And I anticipate that it's going to be a great event. And I'm glad to see that we're now able to show the working class, and particularly our white sisters and brothers, in terms of understanding how the fight for freedom and emancipation for African Americans is inextricably linked to the emancipation of the entire working class. And so much is done in this society to try to make the white working class feel as if it is not part of the Black working class. They go to great degrees to do that. And in terms of trying to separate them from immigrant workers, to separate them from African-American workers, to separate them from workers who work at Amazon, or workers who work for Starbucks or Trader Joe's, to divide us. And so this is something that's very important. So I'm really hoping that people will come out and support this. It's going to be a great day. And I think that it's also important to mention that we're going to honor Danny Glover, who has an association with the ILWU that goes back some 55 years. First thing is, Danny was born and raised in San Francisco. His parents were postal workers. They both belonged to the union. They were members of the NAACP. And so that's the kind of a family that he comes from. And so, but in terms of his association with the ILWU, and this is something that you can attest to because you were a part of San Francisco State. First of all, everyone should know that Danny is a renowned actor, stage, screen, he's a filmmaker. I refer to him as a revolutionary social justice activist and a humanitarian. And the ILWU's association with the San Francisco State strike in 1968 is noteworthy because the American Federation of Teachers, which is the union that the teachers at San Francisco State were members of, and when they had a strike vote, the ILWU, Local 10, Local 6, they all supported and endorsed their strike. And it didn't end there. They also came out to San Francisco State and joined the picket line. But it didn't end there. They also provided longshore casual jobs to American Federation of Teachers that were on strike. Students like yourself and Danny had jobs working on the docks. William Bill Chester, the international vice president of the ILWU, was selected as a part of the select committee representing labor to negotiate a settlement of the strike. Yours truly, Clarence Thomas, along with Danny Glover, we were both members of the Black Student Union Central Committee that initiated the strike, and in conjunction with the Third World Liberation Front, was the leadership for one of the longest student strikes in American history. And that, and at that time, I had no idea that I was going to wind up being a member of the ILWU, even though I had a father and a grandfather that were members. And I did not have the political consciousness at that time to be able to reflect on the fact that the 1934 strike in San Francisco, which was so historic in many, many ways. If we want to talk about the right to fight for to a hiring hall where workers could democratically and fairly dispatch jobs, or if we wanted to talk about the importance of having a coast-wide contract agreement, and then what happened with after the killing of one maritime and a longshore worker, and what followed that was the San Francisco strike that lasted for 4 days in San Francisco, paralyzing the entire city. If I could have reflected on that, which I did not do in 1968, but it sort of puts into context of how we students in 1968, we were carrying on in that tradition, Steve. And that was really something to because we were doing it in San Francisco. And I think that the ILWU members certainly had a sense of that. And so that association with the ILWU and the San Francisco State Strike, uh, Danny Glover, and my own experience in that strike, what came out of that, of course, was the establishment of a Black Studies and a School of Ethnic Studies that still stands today. We also established the precursor for the Educational Opportunity Program, later known as EOP, where we were organizing and fighting for open admissions. We wanted to see more Black, brown, people of color, as well as more working class people being admitted into San Francisco State. So all of that was happening. And so for Danny Glover, this served as the foundation for his um, belief in radical economic and social justice transformation. Uh, that was one of the most successful confrontations in terms of student confrontations anywhere in the country. And so I can remember so vividly that Danny and I were arrested in 1967 around the question of the San Francisco Gator newspaper was putting out all kinds of propaganda, undermining our ability to secure foundation funding for many of the programs that the Black Studies Department wanted to initiate. And I can remember so well of us being arrested and being thrown out. This was 1 year before the strike. And I remember how the students, rose up and said, hey, they need to have due process. You can't just summarily expel them because something went down on the campus. There was an incident that took place. Fisticuffs happened in the Gator office, but we were reinstated, you know. And so when you happen to be involved in those kinds of struggles when you're a young person and you can win 4.5 months of struggle, and that program stands today. Of course, there are many contradictions. Many of the people who were part of that struggle were never hired at San Francisco State. But the point of it is that that experience for Danny Glover and myself served as a very meaningful moment in our lives that I think has carried over a half a century for our activism today. But one of the things about Danny Glover that is so noteworthy is like his mentor Harry Belafonte and Paul Robeson, who mentored Harry Belafonte, is that Danny is an actor, he's an artist who has a social conscience and who has used his platform as a celebrity to further the struggle of freedom, justice, and democracy for the working class and the oppressed at home and abroad. And I think that makes him so unique. And Paul Robeson is an honorary member of ILWU. He was designated as such in 1943. I can recall so vividly that Danny Glover spoke at the 33rd ILWU International Convention in in Vancouver when they honored Paul Robeson, and Danny spoke along with Paul Robeson Jr. Danny Glover was one of the first people to come out and support the Million Worker March. He was at the Million Worker March kickoff rally at ILWU in 2004. Not only did he endorse it, he also contributed financially to it. He was one of the keynote speakers at the Lincoln Memorial, and as many of the listeners may know, that was all about putting forward a workers' agenda and defying the leadership of the ILWU and the AFL-CIO by taking a course that challenged business unionism and challenged John Kerry and John Edwards, who were running for president. Also, Danny played a very important role in the anti-apartheid struggle. While Local 10 was engaged in boycotting South African cargo, Danny Glover was in the vanguard of entertainers and actors in the struggle against the apartheid movement. In one of his movies, Lethal Weapon, one of the screenplays had included scenes about South African underworld figures. So they were able to bring up the subject of the apartheid struggle in one of his films. And I know for a fact that he had something to do with making that happen. And so it's just great to see all of these things happening. Danny has been very a very strong advocate in standing up and supporting political prisoners. He met with members of the Cuban Five. ILWU Local 10, ILWU supported the Cuban Five. He met with them in prison. He met with them after they were released. He has championed the release of Mumia Abu-Jamal just this past February. He spoke at Local 10 when we shut down all 5 Bay Area ports, calling for the release of Mumia Abu-Jamal. When we had our May Day 2008 West Coast port shutdown, Danny was a speaker there, you know, and that was a historic moment because that was the first time that U.S. labor had ever engaged in a strike, not for wages or for benefits, but to oppose U.S. imperialism in terms of those wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Following 2008 May Day, Danny has participated in a number of ILWU Local 10 commemorations of May Day, be it concerned with Black Lives Matter, workers' rights, immigrant rights. He has been there. And it was something that he wanted to be a part of. In many ways, he was collaborating with the ILWU. He participated in the groundbreaking August 2019 Labor and Community Forum that was held in Oakland. You were there, Steve, around the issue of keeping the Oakland A's out of the 3rd busiest port on the West Coast, Howard Terminal. He spoke against that and also made a commitment to do all that he possibly could. And it's important at this particular point for me to say that the Oakland A's are now headed to Las Vegas, Nevada. I understand that there's been some kind of a tentative agreement for the citizenry of Las Vegas to come up with some money in order to build this baseball park at the old Tropicana Hotel. That has been a historic struggle that in many ways reminds me of the anti-apartheid struggle, where you had the employers, you had stevedoring companies, all opposed to the Oakland A's going to Howard Terminal. But the most revolutionary and progressive action that took place was the Organization of Schools and Labor Against Privatization, otherwise known as SLAP. OEA members, dock workers, other union members, and community people, all coming together around the issue of stopping privatization at the port and also in our schools. And so Danny played a very important role in supporting that. I think it's important for us to celebrate individuals like Danny, who, like his predecessor, Harry Belafonte and Paul Robeson, these individuals took unpopular positions in some instances, at least in terms of what the American body politic would define as such. Whether or not it's fighting against the anti-apartheid struggle, supporting Hugo Chavez and the people of Venezuela, fighting for the for the end of the Cuban embargo, supporting the Black Liberation Movement, and they did these things despite the impact that it may have had on their careers and their income. These are all men that I believe had a revolutionary spirit. They were all very supportive of the ILWU. And I just think that it's most fitting that Danny Glover be made honorary member of ILWU Local 10. There has never been a person who's been a recipient of an honorary membership in Local 10 that has had the number of years of involvement with the ILWU. And I think that that is remarkable. And we believe that this is long overdue. And I'm glad that we've been able to achieve this. And we're looking forward to him receiving this honor. And we have a wonderful plaque that I will make available to you so that you can put it up online. I don't want to put it up too early. We'll have something up online for Monday that captures the history that I've just outlined to you. This is a very important event, for, I'm sure, for Danny. I'm sure he will be greatly moved by this. It certainly means a great deal for me because I've known him for so long. He's been unwavering in terms of his support for the struggle, and I feel such a closeness to him as well as to you because you were a part of the San Francisco State Strike yourself, Steve, and you realize how important that event has been in all of our lives. And that's not to say that others have not been as involved. I'm not saying that, but most certainly we've had a connection because of our relationship with labor and the community, labor video project, and all that you've done. And
Well,
Danny's association.
We have laborfest.net, Laborfest, which commemorates the San Francisco general strike for the entire working class, because that general strike was a way that showed the working class how to confront the capitalists. That when you have a collective general strike, they're not making profits, and then they are forced to make concessions. That's the only way. It's like the capitalists do not want general strikes, and most of the business union bureaucrats are terrified of general strikes because it shows the collective power of the entire working class. It breaks the union buses. When you talk about Amazon organizing, that's the way you could organize Amazon. When UPS goes out to bring out FedEx and Amazon workers and shut the whole country down and saying, we're not going back to work until we get a union. That's power.
And Steve, I think that if anything, programs such as this that underscores the need for the rank, really for the rank and file, because we need to understand the power lies with the rank and file. I was an officer once at Local 10. I believe some of my most important contributions to the local didn't come when I was an officer. It came when I was a rank and filer. Because when you are an officer, you do have an obligation. There's a lot of ramifications in terms of being, and I'm not knocking being, we need strong leadership, but the power does not reside with the officers. The power resides with the rank and file. When Harry Bridges would go to the bargaining table and the employer would say, Harry, this is outrageous. How could you do this? Harry said, it's not me, it's the rank and file. This is what they want. Harry once said, even when they're wrong, they're right. And I think, Harry said, he said, yeah. He said, I got a lot of publicity, I was, in the news, and I met people in Hollywood and world leaders and all that stuff. He said, but I was also the one that was in jail, and facing these charges. He said, but the rank and file was the power. And everyone who was in the ILWU was not a lefty. Yes, there were leftists in there, Marxist Leninists, anarchists, and others, strong Black trade unionists. But even the people who were moderate, and I would imagine even some of those who were Republican, they supported Bridges because they thought that he was honest, he had integrity, and he was not for sale. And they stood by him throughout all of those 4 trials that he went through. And that tells you a great deal about how democracy really works. And so, the ILWU it has democracy at its very core. And the founders of the union were socialists, and they had a commitment to that. And that is the reason why when they negotiate contracts, they're not only negotiating for the rank and file, they're negotiating for the retirees. They're negotiating for the surviving spouses. All of that goes into that. But the most important thing, the bedrock of the power, does not rest with its leadership. It rests with the rank and file. And I remember so well Harry Bridges telling the bosses in the 1940s. He says, stop telling these lies about how you are in business to provide jobs. He said, the only reason why you're at the bargaining table is because if you don't come, we're going to shut you down. So every penny that we make is less, 1 penny less in profits for you. And they said, Harry, you're right. We are in business to make money. Harry said, you stay on your side of the table, I'll stay on mine. Stop with the bullshit. There is a need for working class consciousness. There's, and so I don't want to, get off point here, but
this is one of the issues. There's a strike wave going on in this country that we haven't had in many decades. The writers are going out, 11,000 writers, the actors and actresses are going out. The Teamsters at UPS may be going out. But one of the key issues facing the working class is AI, artificial intelligence, and the longshoremen have faced as well. Because as you were saying earlier in the discussion, in China, they've virtually eliminated large numbers of longshoremen. So what do workers do when their jobs are going to be eliminated? And AI, Goldman Sachs has said 300 million jobs may be eliminated. And it raises the question, which the writers themselves have raised, this is an existential crisis for them because their whole industry could be destroyed. So what they're fighting about is not just a dollar or a wage increase, whether they're going to survive as a workforce and instead of being turned into gig workers. Raise the question of power. Who's going to benefit from AI? Is it going to be the workers and their families and society, or the billionaires? And I think that's a question of the working class, power, socialism, and a labor party, a workers' party, to say, if you're going to bring in automation and technology, it has to benefit the working class. It has to benefit the people, not the billionaires.
There's no question about that, because there's already a great deal of income inequality, and one of the things that I really resent very much, and we saw a lot of this, during the course of the ILWU PMA contract negotiations. The bosses do all that they possibly can to mislead the public about longshore workers' income. And part of the reasons for doing that is to create a division between the working class. Most of the people in the general public are workers, okay? And so when the employer conflates the numbers, when they take people who work in management, like the foreman and the walking bosses, as we call them, their supervision on the ships, and when they take the people who are the administrators on the docks, the marine clerks, and they take people who are the most highly skilled, the crane operators, and they say, well, this is what the average longshore worker makes. It's not true. It's a lie. But they do that specifically to make the public resent the longshore workers. And I just like to say this. Longshore workers have one of the most dangerous jobs of any blue collar workers in the world. And this is why. There is a great deal of tonnage that's moved on that waterfront by cranes and container movement machines, be it a top pig, a transtainer. If anything should hit you, it's either going to maim you for life or it's going to kill you. When you go to work at the Port of Oakland or any particular port in the country, they have signs up that says, when you enter these premises, there are known carcinogens, particulate matter from diesel fuel, otherwise known as soot. Longshore workers work rain, sleet, or snow, day and night. They're subjected to a number of health challenges. And so these are things that are important for people to understand about how we pay for our jobs with our lives. And this is a very dangerous job with significant health impact. As many of your listeners may be aware of, just last week, a longshore brother lost his life in the crane. He had a heart attack. And you know, when you up in that crane and something happens to you, I was told that it took 45 minutes to be able to access that brother because of the challenges. You know, first of all, you just can't, you can't use the elevator because of where he was in the crane. So you got to climb up, you know, then you got to make sure that that it's safe for the mechanics to go. There's a lot of challenges. That's one of the worst places to have a health episode is in that crane. But there's so many challenges. And so longshore workers are underpaid compared to what it is that they're faced with. And as was mentioned, $500 billion is what the ILWU members generated for the shipping companies, stevedoring companies, the terminal operators during COVID-19. We made sure that the global economy continued to function, and it was important to do so. But when you make that kind of money, and then you tell the workers who generated, that's our money that we made. We don't know what the future holds. You go and kick rocks. And we saw what the response was when longshore workers in the Port of Oakland refused to take jobs just the week before last. Friday day, Saturday night, Sunday day, showing the employers that we have not lost the history and traditions of Harry Bridges, Henry Schmidt, Cleophas Williams, Leo Robinson, Howard Kaler, all of the longshoremen who came before them and who were able to set the table for them. Longshore workers have not lost their consciousness as to their power at the point of production. And that is the only reason why the employer sits down to talk with us. But I think the point that you made about these other industries in terms of artificial intelligence and the issue of robotics, it's not just longshore workers. Longshore workers are highlighting that particular issue because of our importance to the global economy, because of our importance to imports and exports on the West Coast and our connection to Asia. But other segments of the working class, we have these same, we got to begin to talk about these issues in a real way, the same way that longshore workers and teachers in Oakland sat down and began to discuss, oh, John Fisher is not only attempting to privatize the Port of Oakland, he's a major player in charter schools. He owns a charter school. He promotes it. So here's a guy that's doing charter schools, privatizing public education, and doing the same thing with the third business port. We have to connect those dots so that people can see what kind of a guy this is, and how terrible it's people like State Senator Nancy Skinner, former state assemblyman Ron Bonta, who's now the Attorney General for the state of California, how these two individuals who call themselves friends of labor, these people don't care about labor. All they care about is getting the mother's milk of politicians, and that's the funding from the ruling class. It doesn't matter if the money comes from right-wing Republicans or reactionary Democrats. It doesn't matter to them. It's unconscionable what they were attempting to do. Unconscionable. And because of the fact that the OEA, the ILWU, community, and other unions stood up, and we had to take on some of the most powerful forces in the labor movement. The building trades were behind this. The Teamsters were behind this. And we challenged them. We challenged them. And now they're on their way to Las Vegas. We still have to pay attention to whether or not they're going to try to continue to use Howard Terminal for some purpose other than maritime. We got to be very mindful of that. But I also think that it is important to highlight to the class of how important a victory that was to be able to stop one of the richest men in America, who owns the A's, the Gap, who also owns Old Navy and a whole bunch of other stuff, from taking Howard Terminal and building multi-million-dollar condominiums and hotels and recreation space and all kinds of things that don't benefit the working class at all. This is a threat to labor. And so to be able to thwart that was a major accomplishment. And the working class needs to take a lesson in terms of that grouping, that coalition, that alliance, these alliances that were formed. And I think that's very, very important. And Danny Glover played a very important role in terms of supporting that and making all that happen.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Clarence Thomas, retired Secretary Treasurer of ILWU Local 10, about a special ILWU meeting, Local 10, on Juneteenth, where actor Danny Glover, who's been part of the history of the ILWU since he went on strike and was working on the docks, is now being honored. And you have written a new book, which we can get into at another discussion, on Cleophas Williams, first Black president of Local 10, and the struggle against racism, which still is going on in the labor movement, in the unions, in San Francisco, among city workers, where there's systemic racism, and Black workers are being driven out of their jobs with hanging nooses, being terrorized in this country as I speak. So this is not just a fight in the past, it's a fight in the present. And we will take that up in a future program. And we need a labor channel, really, for all the struggles, the stories of history of the working class, because Abraham Lincoln did not want to bring in Blacks into the army during the Civil War. It was only that they couldn't win the Civil War that they brought Blacks in and armed them. And that was the most dangerous thing that the Confederacy did not want, and that is armed Blacks fighting in the Civil War, because that they saw as a very dangerous thing. When you oppress people and keep them in slavery, and then they're armed and trained, that's something to worry about. So this is a rich history, and this is what the right wing are afraid of when they talk about they want to fight wokeism. Their idea of fighting wokeism is fighting people waking up to the reality of the history of the United States and the world, what's really going on in this country. That's what they're afraid of, and they're not going to be able to get away with it, because even in Florida and Texas, people are fighting back.
That is right.
And they need the support of the ILWU. They need the support of all workers and unions in this country to be successful. It's not just about them, it's about all of us.
About all of us. Well, thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for plugging my book, Cleophas Williams, My Story, my Life in ILWU Local 10. You can get that book at millionworkermarch.com, and I'm looking forward to having a discussion about that.
And they will be on Labor Fest.
Yeah, on the 20th.
Laborfest.net. Yes. You'll be
Yeah,
speaking
yeah, at the Tenderloin Museum.
Yes. So we're going to have a good one. Take care.
Thank you, Steve. Stay
Okay.
safe.
Solidarity.